Hi everybody. We're about to shine a light on an allegedly biased source to see what flavor of bias we're dealing with. Well, maybe instead of a regular light, this is more like shining a black light because some of these sources will be pretty slimy. So what do I mean by flavor of bias? Well, there's political bias, which is what most people think of, but there are other types of bias too, like how local news stations often prefer stories about crime and danger over positive stories. In my opinion, it's that bias for sensationalism over facts that rarely get called out, and it's perhaps more of a problem than political bias, so this flowchart will help you catch that kind of bias too. Okay, so let's take a look at an example source that we'll use to go through the flowchart. Here's a Los Angeles Times article called "Free Public Transit and Roads Without Traffic? Sounds like a fairy tale, but LA can have both." According to this article, a concept called congestion pricing could solve traffic issues in Los Angeles. Congestion pricing is where you charge tolls to people driving on the freeways when traffic gets really heavy. It's supposed to discourage driving and then encourage other ways of getting around, like the bus or the train. Anyway, let's say that I hate this idea, and I say, whoa, 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 whoa. Hold on. I disagree. That won't solve anything. This source is biased. Fake news. Okay, well, back up there, Jared. First of all, what you're accusing here is bias. That's different from fake news. Second, just because you say something is biased doesn't automatically make it true. Let's use the flow chart to see if my accusation of bias is any good. Okay, so this flowchart is in a Word file that you can download from Canvas. You'll see the link at the bottom of this page. When you open it, the first question that you get asked is, which of the 4 ideals of journalism is accused of being violated? Okay, so this is the most important question that determines your path in the flowchart, so I should take a moment to explain what this is really asking. Have you ever heard the expression, you need to know the rules before you can break them? Well, same thing here. When you call something biased, you first need to figure out what the source should be doing. In other words, what are the rules? What are the ideals that this source is breaking? Here you get 4 ideals to choose from, and you need to decide which one the biased source is breaking. The first ideal, comprehensive and proportional coverage, just means that sources should not be ignoring important stories, and that they should be giving a fair amount of coverage to different viewpoints. So choose this ideal if you think a viewpoint is not getting enough coverage, or you could choose it if you think a viewpoint is getting too much coverage. The next ideal, obligation to the truth, just means that sources should be telling the truth. So choose this if you think a source is making a claim, but it got the facts wrong. Now the last 2 ideals are combined into one option in the flowchart. Discipline of verification just means that sources should be fact-checking what they report. Choose this if you think a source is quoting or giving a platform to someone, but not fact-checking them. Independent monitor of power is similar. It means that sources should be serving as a check and balance on groups in power. Those groups could be government, business, or any other organization in power. Choose this if you think a source is not being a good watchdog. If you forget what any of these mean, don't worry. There's some help text that appears when you try to select any of them. You'll see that in a minute. Okay, so what do you think? Which ideal of journalism am I accusing the LA Times article of violating by disagreeing about what they say on congestion pricing? Is this a violation of comprehensive and proportional coverage? Am I arguing that there also needs to be anti-congestion pricing views in the LA Times to balance this one out? Well, no, I wasn't being anywhere near as diplomatic or thoughtful as that. I was mostly just complaining that I disagreed with this article, that it wasn't telling the truth. So let's try the next ideal. Is this accusation then about obligation to the truth? Oh yes, that's it. My complaint was that the article wasn't telling me the truth about congestion pricing, so I'm going to go with that. Now, Now that we have this ideal business figured out, let's go see how my argument pans out. So what you're going to do is click on whichever ideal you think is getting broken to move on to the next part. If you're doing this with a keyboard instead of a mouse, once your cursor is on the option that you want, you can hit enter and it will do the same thing. Okay, so here's the help text that I mentioned, reminding you what obligation to the truth means in case you forgot. After that, it asks you a new question. Is the allegedly biased source marked as an editorial or opinion, or otherwise intended to contain non-objective content? Well, that's a good question. Is my source supposed to be an opinion piece? Let's go take a look. Yep, there it is. Okay, I should have looked more closely. Up at the very top of the article, it's marked as opinion. So this article is an editorial. It looks like the answer is yes, this is supposed to be opinion. So I'm going to select yes. And here's our answer. Your source is biased, but it is responsibly labeled as biased, in which case it is not significantly violating the obligation to the truth ideal. Okay, so my source is biased, but I didn't prove that it violates the obligation to the truth ideal, so no harm, no foul. But right below this, the flowchart does add that I still have some options if I'm stubborn. If you feel that this editorial is particularly dangerous or irresponsible to publish, you can still argue that this should have been fact-checked using the discipline of verification ideal, or argue that this viewpoint should have never gotten any coverage at all using the comprehensive and proportional coverage ideal. So the short version is that you could still try to prove bias in other ways using the other ideals, but we won't do that right now. Just to give you an idea though, if you did choose one of the other paths, it would start asking you to do things like pick apart some of the facts in the article, or check the source's website to see if there are other viewpoints that balance this one out. It makes you do a little work to prove that there's bias. This makes you really think about what kind of bias you're dealing with and what the solution should be. I think if you're going to call something biased, you owe it to yourself and to the source to be clear about what you mean and make sure that your argument is solid. Now, even though this takes a few minutes to use the chart on an article, it can be a rock for you on a topic, this topic of bias, that many students really feel helpless on. So if you want to start over and evaluate a new bias claim, well, our flowchart's pretty messy right now with all these expanded answers, so just close the document and reopen it. By default, it will open with all the questions collapsed so you can start fresh. By the way, one last thing, you don't need to memorize this flowchart or fully explore it right now. It's more of a tool that you can save for later if you think it will come in handy in the future. However, the end of week assignment that you'll get pretty soon will ask you to use this flowchart to evaluate one accusation that somebody else has made about the media being biased. So if you're curious to give this a try, you'll get at least one chance to use it and see how you like it. Okay, so that's enough time in the swamp. Let's move on to the final concept of the week. Nicolas Cage and swimming pool deaths. Yeah, you heard me right. Okay, bye for now.